issues arose that challenged America in the ideals of the Revolution, of liberty and equality. Henry David Thoreau, one of the Concord authors, realized that one of the most grave deficiencies in our ideology was the institution of slavery. In one of his essays, Civil Disobedience, he asked us, "Do we call this the land of the free? What is it to be free of King George and continue to be slaves of King Prejudice? What is it to be born free and not to live free? What is the value of any political freedom but as a means to moral freedom?"
Well, I mean, Thoreau makes a statement, in Civil Disobedience, Thoreau makes a statement about a majority of one, basically expressing this notion of the sovereignty of the individual as opposed to the majority, which of course in the democratic impulse is the majority rules, period. The difficulty is, what if you have a majority, as you did during Thoreau's time, that supported slavery or some other, what we would now regard as immoral group action, or that would sanction that kind of slavery, for instance, that would enslave 6 million people? What do you do as a moral being? What do you do? And what Thoreau says is, when you're acting from principle, action from principle makes the individual makes, in a sense, the individual the majority. Now, from a common sense point of view, that's insane. How can one single individual be the majority? But, I mean, we have now obvious instances of individuals changing the world. You have Martin Luther King Jr. with the Civil Rights Movement, starting those brave individuals who in the beginning were the ones to raise the consciousness of the country and change the country, and through the country, the world, I think. Now civil rights, we're actively thinking about what are civil rights, whereas it wasn't really thought of that much before. Now it's kind of on the forefront of everyone's mental plate, you might say. You have Tolstoy doing the same thing. You have people saying, wait a minute, and standing up and questioning things that before were not questioned as a consequence of this notion that acting from principle makes you a majority of one. In some strange sense, it does make you, if you know you're right and you're confident that history will pronounce you right, then it gives you an enormous amount, or has given certain people an enormous amount of, it enables them to put up with an awful lot of stuff, an awful lot of nonsense, an awful lot of abuse, and in some cases even death. It's the stuff that martyrs are made of.
Here we have men in Washington City, our senators and our congressmen, and President Polk, our so-called leader, who feel that they have a mandate, that they have been sent to their offices because they have the majority of American voters who have sent them there. However, a man could only have 51% of the vote, and yet he considers himself in the majority. And I think that there are 49% of the American people who do not have their say in what is going on in the government. I think that President Polk is doing what he wants. I think that our congressmen and our senators are doing what they want. And for instance, the present war in Mexico. I do not recall a single individual here in Concord writing a letter to President Polk asking him to start a war with Mexico. Nor do I know of anyone in any other city or town in the north that wants a war in Mexico. And yet President Polk started the war in Mexico without even considering what we wanted or how we felt. And so, once again, it is the American government doing what they want and not caring one bit what the American people really want. If I am doing what I feel right at any time, I am in the majority already. It seems that a lot of the so-called reformers are always worrying about getting a majority on their side. They feel that they cannot end slavery unless the majority of Americans are against it. They cannot end the war in Mexico unless a majority of Americans feel that the war needs to be over. If I'm doing what I think right at any time, I am already a majority because I am an individual thinking the thoughts and following his conscience as he sees fit. So already I have started to change the world. Already I have started to show the country that I'm willing to stand up for injustice and stand up for honesty and integrity. By following my conscience, by doing what I think right at any time, I am already a majority because the individual is the one that has all of the power. Well, for some time now, I have been very aware of the fact that we are supposedly a free nation, yet we have almost 3 million Negroes in bondage in the South. And I cannot really consider myself part of the United States because the United States supports slavery and supports the current war in Mexico, which I consider an immoral and an unjust war.
Yeah, fundamentally, the dynamic that Thoreau discusses in Civil Disobedience, at the most fundamental level, and he states it at one point in his essay, he says, unjust laws exist. Fact. You have three options when you look at these unjust laws. One is you can obey it. Just unthinkingly obey the law, the unjust law. Another one is you can say, well, I'm going to obey it for the time, but for whatever reason, because I don't want to get in trouble, make my life too much of a hassle, I have a nice big house and I don't want them to take my house, I'm going to obey the law now, but I'm going to work to change it. That's another option. The third option is the one that Thoreau espouses, and he confesses that it's a very, very difficult option because some of the consequences are horrific sometimes. Disobey the law. If you know that law is unjust, disobey it. Now, sometimes the consequences are horrible because they can take your car, they can harass you, and Thoreau mentions this. He said, this is hard. I know this is hard. But if you believe in this higher law, if you believe that divine law, or whatever you want to call it, is universal law, as many people do, the Martin Luther Kings of the world, the people who lay down in front of trains to stop radioactive waste and so on, they're so convinced of the truth of their principles that they're fighting for, that they will make enormous sacrifices, in many cases the ultimate sacrifice, to disobey the law, disobey the unjust law. And it's very clear, and it's unfortunate in a sense, because it makes every one of it makes you feel indicted. If you know that that law is unjust, you have one of three options. What are you going to do? Make your decision and live with it. That's tough.
I think that as a nation we are full of unjust laws, the fugitive slave laws just being the perfect example. According to the fugitive slave laws, it is the duty of every American citizen to return runaway slaves to their masters in the South. Now, as human beings, as divine creatures, we know that that is wrong, to return a man to bondage. It is a sin against humanity, it is a sin against nature. And so, in that sense, I think that we need to listen to our conscience and not worry about what the federal laws have to say. I think that it is important that as individuals, we do what we feel right. As an American citizen, the only obligation I have is to do what I think right at any time. And the reason I'm thinking things that are right is because I'm listening to that voice of God inside me and not paying attention to what President Polk or the federal government